So tonight we're going to talk about choosing an inclusive childcare program for children with Down syndrome. Tonight's session is a partnership between Childcare Answers and Down Syndrome Indiana. So I'll go ahead and start with introducing myself, and then I'll have Stephanie introduce herself as well. So my name is Lauren. I am the Family Support Specialist with Childcare Answers. So in my role, I help connect families to childcare, specifically children who are infants and toddlers or children with special needs. And then I also provide parenting workshops and one-on-one support for families. All of that is free of charge, and I am available and accessible as you need me. And one of our roles is that we really work to partner with local agencies, and one of those agencies is Down Syndrome Indiana. So I'll have Stephanie share about herself and a little bit about DSI.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Lauren. So like Lauren said, I'm Stephanie Garner. I am the program coordinator at Down Syndrome Indiana. I've been in my role for about 5 years, and I love our organization. So at Down Syndrome Indiana, we are a nonprofit, and our mission is to enhance the lives of individuals with Down syndrome. And we like to consider ourselves kind of a one-stop shop for information and resources. So we provide families with new parent packets when they get a Down syndrome diagnosis, either prenatally or at birth. We have a lot of different webinars available. This recording will be part of our webinar series for new parents. We do different trainings. We have an annual conference every year. We have a lot of different fun family-friendly activities. We have about 11 community groups, so support groups throughout Central Indiana. We have a lot of really cool stuff to help support our families. So, I got all choked up. If anybody out there is listening to this and you need help or support, we don't always have all the answers, but we know a lot of really great people like Lauren at Childcare Answers, and we are happy to help you find the answers that you need. So thanks for teaming up with us, Lauren, and teaching us all a little bit more about childcare options.
Of course. And so tonight, as we discuss childcare and talk about what to look for in childcare, I will be kind of that childcare expert, and then bringing Stephanie in as that Down syndrome expert to really meet your needs and answer your questions. So as I'm talking and as you're asking questions, we'll both kind of chime in and talk about things. And Stephanie has some great stories and information to share as well.
So one of the questions that I hear a lot from our families is, what is the right childcare situation for my kiddo with Down syndrome? Is it better for them to be in like a home environment or like a center type facility? And what if the place I really want my child to go says they won't take them? Then what do I do? What are my options?
Yeah, I think that those are two things that I hear a lot too, for families with children with special needs, but also families across the gamut of what program is best for me. And while I can't say this is the program that you should send your child to, because everyone knows their family and their situation and what their goals are for their family the best, what I will provide you are your options. So in order to decide what's best for my child, I need to know what options are available to me, right? And as we're talking, I will share information about what happens if that program is like, I don't feel equipped to take your child, or I've never had a child with special needs or a child with Down syndrome, so I'm really not sure what to do. But kind of that blanket statement is all programs are required under the ADA to make reasonable accommodations to support children with special needs in their program. So based on a special need, a program can never deny you. But I also understand when a program says no, that you then have a choice to make, right? You either have to say, okay, I'll go find someone else, or you fight for your child, or you fight legally because you're protected by the ADA. And that can be a really hard conversation to have and a decision to make, because you may not know where to go and what's best. And I think that that's a personal journey. but just know that there are supports available. And I'll talk more at the end of the presentation about how Child Care Answers can help locate childcare and our partners and how they can support the child care program. But just know, as you're kind of thinking about what program should I choose and what happens if they say no, that there are protections under the law that do support you as a parent and support your child. So that kind of really takes us to this, right? So you are your child's first teacher, you're their advocate, you know their needs best, you know their strengths, you know their challenges, you know the type of care that they need, and you also know what your hopes and dreams are for them. So use all of that information to guide your decision-making process as you're really in the driver's seat when it comes to your child's care and education. You are their advocate and you get to make those decisions. So you are the lead driver, regardless of what you're hearing from others, you get to make that ultimate decision. So I really want to empower you as that parent to know that you know your child better than anyone else. And so you know, once you hear what your options are, what was going to fit your child's needs the best. And it's also okay to say, you know what, we started this and it's not working. Let's change things, or let's meet and talk about things, because it's not always going to be smooth sailing. It's going to be a bumpy road. It's like that for every family as they navigate their child's childcare journey and school journey. But you really are that biggest advocate for your child. So just that sense of empowerment, I think, is really important. So as we talk about childcare, I want to use kind of this analogy of building your toolbox. So finding childcare isn't as simple as I see a childcare program down the street, it's close to my house, okay, let me send my child there. Of course, you can do that, but how do you know that that is the best placement for your child? How do you know that that is a quality childcare program in the first place? So as I'm sharing information, I'm pretty much going to be giving you tools to add to your toolbox. So we'll talk about identifying quality indicators, so putting that hammer into your toolbox. We'll talk about the types of programs, so adding that screwdriver, of really giving you those tools to pull from so that you're building that toolbox and you know just a little bit more about what your options are. And I think information is power, right? So once we have the information and we know what to look for, what to ask, we're empowered to make those really firm decisions. So the first step in choosing quality childcare is really identifying potential programs in the first place. So as you're beginning your search, it's important to take in a couple of options. So from those options, you're going to narrow down your options to decide what is best for you. But there are a lot of ways in which you can get this information. So gather kind of that list of programs that you want to weed through. So myself at Child Care Answers can help provide a list of licensed, registered, and exempt childcare programs that you can begin to weed through. I also recognize that that doesn't include all of the types of settings that you might be interested in. So while I'm a resource, I might not be the end all be all when it comes to identifying potential programs. Utilize your friends and family. Where are they going? Who do they recommend? Who do they not recommend? And use that as information and fuel to start building out your list. Do your own internet search. Post on social media. Social media can be a great tool for, again, figuring out those places to add to your list and those that you don't want to add to your list. And then I think what's really helpful when it comes to parenting children with special needs is using your peer support group. These are people who are in your shoes. They're living the day-to-day life that you're living as well. So they're often a huge key in figuring out who those potential programs can be. These are people who have sent their children to programs that really supported their child's development. And they might also be people who sent their child to places that were not the best fit for them. So use them as a tool and information in order to get some answers around what programs that you could be looking into. So Tracy posted in the chat, does your organization have information for all over Indiana? And that is a great question, Tracy. So my organization, Childcare Answers, is housed in Indy, and we cover Marion, Hendricks, and Hamilton County. There are resource and referral agencies throughout the entire state that are able to provide the same information that I can. I have access to the same database they do, so I can run a referral for programs across the entire state, while I can also refer you on to the right connection that can also do that same work. So yes and no, right? So yes, I can help you, but I can also connect you with the other me's around the state that do the same work that I do. So great question. So you might be thinking, kind of, what are my care options? So as I'm developing this list, what should I be looking for? So in Indiana, there are 4 main types of childcare programs. First, you have your traditional childcare that you might think of in the sense of childcare. Those are our center-based care programs, and those are things like Goddard, La Petite, KinderCare, those things that we typically hear of when it comes to like corporate childcare. There are also privately run and smaller center-based care programs, but when we think about childcare, it's usually center-based care is what we're thinking about. These are programs that children are separated by age group. So you have an infant room and a toddler room and a twos room, and children will move as they get older. A pro of this is that children are with their same age peers. This is something that you will potentially have to advocate or mention to the child care program, is that you want your child to remain with their peer group, meaning that if your toddler is 18 months old and maybe not yet walking, that they are still moving up into the toddler classroom rather than staying in the infant room because of kind of their physical development, that you want them to continue with their same age peers. But a lot of parents prefer children to stay with that age group. Another pro of center-based care is that in a larger center, you might be able to differentiate between your options of classrooms. There might be 4 twos classrooms. And so you might have the flexibility to sit down with the director and say, which twos teacher is going to support the needs of my child best? I don't want to move into the classroom that has the first opening. I want to move into the right classroom for my child. And in center-based care, because they are typically larger and in a classroom setting, that flexibility is often there versus some of the other settings. A con of a center-based care is it is larger. It's not as homey feeling, and children are with their same age peers versus a home or family childcare setting where all of the children are together. So some parents prefer a home setting where you have your infants through school agers all together in one space. The benefit of this is that the children can learn from each other. The infants learn from the older kids learn to take care of the younger kids. And it can be more of an inclusive setting because of it's more homey. It's also usually lower on numbers because there's a max number that a family child care program can take. So a licensed program usually maxes out around 12 children, and an unlicensed program maxes out at under 5 children unrelated to them. So a home setting and a center are very different settings, and it really comes down to preference. Then you have your private and school-based. So these are private schools that have preschools in them. These are things like your Mom's Day Out programs, co-ops, as well as your school-based developmental preschool. Oftentimes, these are programs where children start around 2 to 3 and then continue on. The benefit of these is, especially for developmental preschool, it's a smaller group designed to really support the needs of children with special needs. Oftentimes in private schools, class sizes are smaller than center-based schools, And if that is a school that your child is going to go into from kindergarten and beyond, then there can be a benefit of putting them in there early so that there is no transition, versus putting them in a center or home and then maybe wanting to make that jump at age 3 to developmental preschool. So that is kind of the benefit or the pros and cons of a private or school-based setting. And oftentimes in public school with developmental preschool, any sort of therapy or therapists are housed within that building. So it's not like where First Steps is coming in, everything is happening within that setting.
I know we're probably going to have some very new parents listening to this who might be feeling really overwhelmed with the whole idea, like what is developmental preschool and First Steps. So just as a quick explanation, so our kiddos with Down syndrome automatically generally qualify for First Step services, which is Indiana's early intervention program. So they get physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, whatever therapies they need at little to no cost. And that is from birth to the age of 3. And then at the age of 3, at their 3rd birthday, those services stop. And then all of those therapy services can be provided for no cost to you from your local school system. So that is when your child would start developmental preschool. So every school system has a developmental preschool, and your First Steps provider will help you with that transition. And then you'll go into the school system, and it's usually only for about 2.5 hours a day, and you can get your therapies there for, again, free to no cost.
And Stephanie and I, when we were prepping for this, we're talking about how beneficial First Steps can be in that transition process into the school system, because they really walk your hand through that process that can be very overwhelming. So that is a true benefit of having those therapies, other than the developmental benefits to your child, which is probably the biggest one, right? That additional benefit is the fact that they really do walk you through that transition, and it is a warm handoff then into your local school system. Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. And then you have your last option are your religious-based childcare programs. So in Indiana, religious settings, which are called childcare ministries, are registered in the state, but they are not licensed, meaning they have some similar regulations to centers and homes who are licensed, but different as well. And there are different tiers of religious settings and the way in which they are registered. All the way from a religious setting who is at the highest quality, who is operating on very similar regulations to centers, to your smaller ministries who aren't engaged in any sort of quality improvement program. A lot of these are kind of your Part D programs and things like that, that really have little to no regulations. Does that mean that they're all bad? Absolutely not. But they're just things that you want to keep in mind when you're going into a program, that in centers and licensed homes, there are things like a ratio, which is the number of children that are allowed to be with one caregiver. In religious organizations and your childcare ministries that are not operating on any quality improvement program or specifically accepting vouchers for childcare, they don't have to abide by those same standards. Some do, and some don't. Some of your preschool programs in your private schools also don't have to abide by those same standards. So that's one of the things that you might want to ask as you're narrowing down the search is, what are your ratios? How many children do you have for one caregiver? An example of this is in an infant setting, you want to have no more than 4 infants for one caregiver. So that's kind of that number that you're thinking of. In some private schools, in some of your childcare ministries who do operate on a high quality kind of continuum, even if they're not required to, their ratio might be 3 to 1. They might say, you know what, we operate actually on a smaller ratio because we see that there's a value in having a smaller class size. Then you also might have on the other spectrum programs who are like, yeah, we have 8 babies and 1 teacher. And that should be a red flag for you. So as you're weeding through them, those are just things to keep in mind as pros and cons of all of these different settings. So one of the things that Stephanie just mentioned is first steps therapy, or the early intervention services for children with special needs, birth to 3. So as a parent of an infant or toddler with special needs, kind of what are you expecting and what are your typical choices? So not like this is the end all be all, but most families who have infants and toddlers with special needs who need care typically choose your traditional childcare settings like a registered ministry, a licensed center, or a licensed home, depending on what you're really looking for in a program. They choose nanny services, so someone who's working individually with your child, either in your home or maybe in someone else's home. And by nanny, this could be kind of friend and family care as well, or early Head Start programs. These are programs that are offered to low-income families that really support the development of the whole child and the whole family. So that can be a really great option as well. So that is typically where children, infants and toddlers with special needs kind of fall. The things to keep in mind are therapy. So most children with special needs, especially children with Down syndrome, qualify for first steps, like Stephanie mentioned. So part of first steps is that they're coming out to you to engage in therapy. So this can be at home or it can be in the childcare setting. So it's one of those things that all childcare programs should be accepting of first steps coming in, but something to communicate with the potential program is that your child does receive first steps therapy, and the intention will be for them to come into the classroom asking, how will you support my child's IFSP, which is what First Steps will give them, which is an individualized family support plan that has goals that will support that child's development. We want to make sure that that teacher is engaged in that therapy process so that they can implement those goals and strategies when that provider isn't there any longer. First Steps is there for maybe an hour or 30 minutes a week. We want to make sure that the rest of the time that they're not there, that your teachers is still working on implementing some of those goals and then communicating with you if you're not there during those therapy sessions so that you can continue to build on those skills at home as well. And then once your child turns 3, they will then qualify for school-based therapy. So therapy that is housed kind of in the school system, so your local school system. Your options also kind of expand with a preschool age child. So we still have traditional care settings, we still have nannies, we have Head Start, which is kind of the continuation of the early Head Start program. And then there's kind of this wide variety of choices now to go to private school, to public school, to developmental preschool, and what setting is best for my child and what path should I take. And oftentimes that can be overwhelming. It can also feel like my child has special needs, so of course they go to developmental preschool. And that may not always be the path that is best for your family. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. However, the school system is required to provide support to your child. So even if in kindergarten they're in private school, they will still get support and they still have access to support from the school system. So I think that that's important to know as a parent, that you can still be accessing those school-based resources from the public school, even in a private school setting. When your child is 3, they will switch from an IFSP to an IEP. It's similar, but it's more educationally focused, still with those goals to be working on. So again, you want to make sure that regardless of care setting that you choose, that they're continuing to work on and implementing IEP goals in that setting. So Stephanie, do you want to share a little bit about how this choice is yours to make?
Definitely. It's really overwhelming thing when you start thinking about school age children. And for a child with Down syndrome, they're typically going to be starting school around the age of 3. And like Lauren said, the choice really is yours to make, and the path that you choose to take is yours. I know families who have done almost every different option. My family in particular, we had grandparents who babysat my daughter when she was little. So I guess we did the nanny care option, right? So they were home with her, and we chose to do developmental preschool with her. So grandparents watched her and took her to developmental preschool for 2.5 hours, and then she came back home to grandparents, and we did that until kindergarten. And that was a really great fit for our family. I'm really glad that we did it that way. And it was great. I know other families who chose to do like a daycare, and then developmental preschool would pick that kiddo up on a bus and bus them to school. And they'd go to school for their 2.5 hours, and then they go back to their daycare facility. And that worked really well for some other family. Other families choose to do private daycare options, or some of them even choose not to do developmental preschool, and instead go to a community preschool or a private preschool full time. And again, it's whatever works best for that family. And there are pros and cons to every single option that you could make. And like Lauren said, there isn't this one choice that you definitely have to make. I wish there was. It would make it so much easier for us as parents. But the one thing that I would encourage you to do is talk to other parents, other moms, other dads, and say, what did you do with your child? What was your situation? How did you feel about what you did? Is there something you'd want to change? And just gather some information. You can ask them, why did you make the decision that you made? And that might help you to kind of work through things.
Wonderful. Perfect. Yes. Yeah. Information again is power. And so ask them, what choice did you make and why did you make it, and what worked well and what didn't work well? Would you make a different choice next time? And all of that is going to give you information to then make the best decision for you. And throw away your mom guilt, throw away your dad guilt. Don't feel guilty about choosing one over the other, and don't let somebody else make you feel guilty. You chose what was best for your situation because you know your child best and you know your situation best. So that takes us into kind of, we have this idea of what's available. Now I start to do my research. So I look up the programs, I look at their inspection reports, I do a Google search, I ask for referrals, I look them up on social media, whatever that may start to look like, to really begin to weed through that list and start to make a really informed decision. So some first kind of initial questions to ask yourself really are, does this program have space for my child? How much does this program cost? Do they accept CCDF or On My Way pre-K vouchers, which are both government subsidy for childcare? So as low-income families, you can qualify for Head Start and Early Head Start. You can also qualify for CCDF and On My Way pre-K. And then, do the hours and location meet my needs? If you have answers here that don't align with what your needs are, then automatically those programs go off your list, even if you love them. If they're not open the hours you need them to be opened, they're not going to work. If it's too expensive, it's not going to work. If they're not willing to bus or have the availability for the bus to come for that child who is in developmental preschool part-time and then in childcare the rest of the time, they're not going to work. So I think you first have to really ask those logistical questions. Once you've asked yourselves those questions, then you have some other tools that can help you identify what program fits best for you. One of those is CareFinder, where you can access inspection reports for licensed and registered programs. So any program that I can refer you on to, you can look up their inspection reports. These are things that when licensing has visited them have found as insufficiencies, but also things like complaints and enforcements against them. One thing I always tell parents is to take all of this information with a grain of salt and you decide what's important to you. You might look up an inspection report and there is a caregiver missing their CPR training, and maybe that's not important to you. Or maybe that is something that is really, really important to you. You decide that. But there's also going to be some red flags that can appear here, like the program was out of ratio. They left a child outside. They fed breast milk to the wrong child. There were cleaning supplies accessible to children. And then anything related to abuse or neglect is going to show up as a complaint and enforcement. So these are all things that I take really as these red flags. And that helps me begin to weed through the list and say, okay, this is not a program. Even if this happened 2 years ago, I don't know what's happening now, and that's not a chance I'm willing to take. So that can be a tool for starting to weed down that list. Another tool is to look at quality. So quality from a lot of different angles. So number one is the program inclusive. Is my child with special needs going to be included in their program? That is huge for a family who has a child with special needs. Another quality indicator is PAST quality, which is the voluntary rating scale for childcare programs. You have to be licensed or at a certain level as a registered ministry in order to qualify for PAST quality. So that is something to take into consideration. So many times preschool programs, private schools and public schools do not qualify. So it may be something that you want to ask them first. Do you qualify for PAST quality? And then what level are you? And I'll share a little bit about the levels in a couple of slides. Another one is national accreditation. So many programs outside of those who are licensed are able to be accredited. So that is another quality indicator to look at. You also want to look at health and safety standards. So this can happen through asking questions about hand washing and cleanliness, but these are often things that we take in through observation. So whether you're actually going in and touring that program or you're on Zoom with the director as they're sharing the space with you, you're taking in information about what health and safety looks like in that program, and you're using that as information to guide your decision. You know what your comfort level is with what you're seeing around you in that space. And then another thing that we're really looking at in the environment, which we can ask this question, but I think looking at the environment gives me a better idea of what's really happening, is this program play-based? Is the kind of purpose of my child being in this program to learn through play, or is my child going to be required to sit and do ditto sheets and do things that may not be as developmentally appropriate? All young children thrive in a setting where they can play and take the lead and be in charge of their own learning. And so that is what we're really wanting, is that driving curriculum for our young children is something that has kind of that basis of play. So inclusion, so what we're looking at when we're looking at an inclusive setting is basically a setting where everyone is able to join in some or part of an activity to the extent in which they're able to participate. So everyone is included in the same activity. And for some children, it may need to be adapted or accommodated in a specific way. That's true for children with special needs, but it's true for all children. You're going to have a forced classroom where you have one child who can put together a 50-piece puzzle and another who's still working on a 10-piece puzzle. Inclusion is where that they can work together on puzzles to the extent at which they can be successful. So you want to ask questions around inclusion. And some of those questions can be, how is everyone invited to participate and play together? Do you encourage open dialogue about children with disabilities and abilities? Do you support the development of friendships, period, where you're wanting everyone to be friends and to support that friendship in play? How do you facilitate play between children who are differently abled? That can include children with special needs, but like I just mentioned, it can include children who are typically developing who just have two different skill sets. You see this oftentimes with infants and toddlers, where you have one who's walking at 10 months and another who doesn't walk until 16 months. How are you including them both in the learning process together? How are you modifying and adapting materials and the space as needed? If my child needs a wheelchair, how are you setting up the space in which my child can navigate through the play space? Is the sensory table at the appropriate height that my child can participate fully in that kind of play? Are you supporting my child's development of their IEP and IFSP goals? How are you taking in that information and then putting that into practice in the care setting? How do you teach respect and perspective taking to all children? And how do you provide the space and freedom to really allow children to explore and experiment? And at that question, you're learning about their curriculum, but you're also learning about inclusion at the same time. And Stephanie, if you want to jump in here and really talk about the differences in children with Down syndrome and how there, again, is not this one-size-fits-all approach to childcare, but also the needs of children with special needs.
Definitely. And Lauren, you've alluded to this a lot, but inclusion really is important for our kiddos with Down syndrome. Children with Down syndrome tend to be developmentally delayed, so they're not meeting those developmental milestones at the same rate as their typically developing peers. And that's okay. And I know as a new mom, I kind of thought my daughter should be with kids who were developmentally the same as her. And that's really not what research shows us. Research shows us that our kids benefit from being around same age, typically developing peers, because they're going to learn from those peers. They're going to work so hard to mimic them. And that really is the best environment. So, really finding that childcare setting where your little one with Down syndrome can benefit from really great peer interaction is important. And I would say that it's important not just for your child, but every other child in that daycare program or childcare setting as well, because that's really where kids are learning the value of including everyone. They're understanding that everybody has value and worth, and we're all different, and that's okay. So I think that is definitely one of the areas that you want to think about, trying to get your child access to those typically developing peers. And sometimes that means that you might have to do some education with your daycare provider, with the teachers at your preschool, to let them know that it's okay that my kiddo can't do all the things that the other kids are doing, but we want them to be there and be participating to the best of their abilities. And they're going to need a little bit of extra help along the way. Kids with Down syndrome can also have some different medical needs. They might have some different feeding needs. Maybe they need their liquids thickened to a certain level. And those are all things that you can talk with your childcare providers about meeting those needs. Maybe you provide the food already thickened to the appropriate level to help them with that process. So I think that for the most part, kids with Down syndrome, they're really not that different than any other child. Sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves thinking, oh, we've got to do all of this stuff differently, but kids with Down syndrome are like any other child. They love to play, they love to engage with other kids. And so, just letting them be kids, letting them play, letting them have fun is really, really important.
Yep, perfect. Thank you. And to kind of take that information. So we have kind of this idea of quality. We have this idea of what my child needs specifically. I know that I might need to provide some education to my childcare program, whatever I choose. Another step in that process is also, do I want a childcare program on PASTA quality? So I mentioned PASTA quality previously, but this is kind of a breakdown of what those levels mean. So when you're looking at the different levels of care, trying to decide at what level are you comfortable, or at what level are you wanting a program if this is something that is important to you. So level 1 is that they meet basic health and safety standards. It essentially means that they meet licensing requirements, and anyone can be a level 1 if they are available to join PASTA quality. Level 2 is meaning that they now create this environment that supports children's learning and development. So it's a lot about the toys and the materials that are accessible to children. Level 3 is now that they're using those toys and materials to plan a curriculum that prepares children for school. And we know, after what we just talked about, that a play-based curriculum is really what we're looking for here. And then a level 4 program is one that has met all of that and has also attained national accreditation. So there are programs that are nationally accredited that are not on PASTA quality, and that's because they choose not to be. There are also programs that are nationally accredited because they can't be on PASTA quality. So this is just, again, one other tool for kind of disseminating quality. So one of my biggest ways of deciding if a program is play-based is really to kind of look at the environment and look at the artwork in the classroom. So as we're taking in this information and looking around, if I see that every butterfly on the wall is beautiful, it looks like a butterfly, it's all the same, that is like a to me as a parent looking for a play-based program. Because the children did not make all of those butterflies, the teachers helped, and the teachers probably made them for the most part, right? There was little child direction when it came to what they were creating. On the other hand, if I see a lot of this picture on the right, that really doesn't even look like a butterfly very much, and they're all different, that is like a check, check, check in my book. That tells me that the children were able to be creative and go in the direction that they wanted to go in. So artwork can be a huge indicator into whether a program is play-based or not. Even if you ask them and they are like, yeah, we're play-based because it's a hot word, and then you go in and you see all these beautiful butterflies on the wall, or all ducks that all have their eyes and nose in the right spot, then you know that they really maybe don't understand what play-based really looks like. So that is kind of my clue into what this program offers. So now that we've weeded all of this down, we've made our selection, and that selection can change. We're not stuck with that selection. Now it's about really developing a partnership with this program. How do I ensure open communication and that we're really creating an environment where my child's needs are met and this program understands my child's needs? And the first step is really sharing information with them. So it's really important from the very get-go that we're sharing information and that we're open and honest with our program. Some parents think that it's best to hold information. Oh, I didn't tell them about my child's feeding tube because I didn't want to scare them and for them to say no. So I waited until it was their first day. Or I didn't tell them that my toddler was still on breast milk because I didn't want to have that conversation yet. I just thought I'd show up on that first day and be like, here's their drink. These are all things that need to be shared because it creates a door for open communication. When we withhold information, it creates this environment where we are no longer in a partnership and it becomes a you against me. So we really want, as we're caring for any child, to have a relationship with that program that understands us as a parent and understands our child. So share their interests, tell them what they like, Because if you tell them what they like, they might be able to bring some of those materials into this space. Tell them what they don't like. My kid's never going to eat broccoli. Don't make them eat broccoli. Don't even put it on their plate. I know you have to, but please don't do it because it's going to create a giant meltdown, whatever it might be. Tell them about their favorite activities so they get to know a little bit more about who your child is. Also tell them their strengths and abilities. We want to be strength-based. We want to focus on those things that your child can do and not just all of the things that you need to support my child in because they can't do it like their peers can. Then begin to talk about those specific needs and the best ways in order to meet those needs. This is how I do it at home. This is how it can look here. Let's talk about what this can look like because I know that my child is one of 20 children in the classroom and maybe you can't do it this way, but could we do it this way instead? So creating a collaborative kind of conversation around meeting needs. Ask them, what is the best way for me to communicate with you? Should I write you notes? Do you want a journal? Do you want an email? Do you want to have weekly phone calls? When I was a TWS teacher, I did weekly phone calls with my kids' parents. And I asked the parents what time of day and what day of the week works best. At the time, I looked at it kind of as this burden, this thing that I had to do. And now I look back on how much of a treat that experience was. It was this time outside of the care setting, away from their child, that we were really able to share. This is what your child's doing here. What are they doing at home? What do you need from me? What are your goals for your child? These are the goals that I have for them. Do those goals align? Because when we're having those conversations in front of children all the time, parents can't take in all that information. You know that. There's a lot going on. You're not taking in everything that your program is saying to you. But also the child is hearing all of that information. And there are some conversations that really don't need to be happening in front of them. So communicate in the way that is going to meet the needs of everyone the best. And then decide how there can be consistency between home and school, especially regarding behaviors and behavioral expectations. And then know that there are people that can support you. Down Syndrome Indiana can come in and provide education. The Joseph Maley Foundation can come in and provide education. Spark Learning Lab, who is our partner agency who supports childcare programs, can come in and provide education. So even if it's as simple as, hey, Lauren, hey, Stephanie, my program needs help, now what? We can set you up with that right person who can come in and provide some education and support to your child's teachers to ensure that everyone is on the same page and meeting your child to the extent in which they need to be met. So as you're kind of thinking and wrapping your head around all of this information around childcare, remember that you know your child best. So follow your gut, follow your intuition. Your gut's usually right and it will lead you in the right direction. Communicate early and often, while also being very understanding of the fact that your child is just one in a group of other children who all have unique needs, regardless of ability or disability. And you need to be understanding of that program as they're learning to care for your child and these other children in this care setting. Know that you're not stuck in your choice. If it's not working, find someone else. You have the choice to stay and educate, leave, fight, whatever you need to do in order to ensure that your child's needs are met. And then again, know that Childcare Answers and Down Syndrome Indiana are here to help you.
That's another thing that I hear a lot from families is, oh, my child can't go to this particular program because they're not potty trained yet. The age of 3, this program says they have to be potty trained. So my kid isn't, what do I do? And the reality is that potty training for kids with Down syndrome is hard because of their decreased muscle tone. They don't notice that they have to go to the bathroom always. And there are lots of kiddos with Down syndrome who start using the potty at 2 or 3, but they might not be totally potty trained quite yet. The average age for a kid with Down syndrome to be potty trained is about 6 years old. So it's really, really, really important to know that your kiddo can still participate in that daycare program, in that childcare setting, without being potty trained.
So programs who are licensed or accept the childcare vouchers through the state are actually not allowed to put stipulations on toileting and moving to the next classroom. So those types of programs who say, oh, you can't come to the threes classroom until you're potty trained, those are actually inappropriate expectations to be placing on children and families in the first place. Also, when it comes to children who have diagnosed disabilities, we know that they're going to reach milestones differently and at different times than their typical peers. So to have the same expectations on a child with special needs versus a typical child is not realistic, and it's not appropriate. And in reality, the expectations for toileting a typical child are between the ages of 2 and 4. So a 3-year-old being toilet trained isn't realistic for any child. Yes, a lot of kids are toilet trained around age 3 because the part of their brain that is responsible for that kind of processing is starting to form at that point. But again, that's not a realistic expectation. So when it comes down to that, if that's the feedback that you're receiving from a program, you have the right to question that. You have the right to bring in childcare answers. I can connect with Spark Learning Lab to offer some support so that they're really getting education around this topic. Another great tool is, and I will bring up our social media page in just a second, but we have a toilet training children with special needs guide on our website, as well as a recorded webinar. And so those are two great things to look at as a parent, but also share with the childcare program so that you're both getting the same message. One thing I hear oftentimes is, you know, at home we use stickers or M&Ms as a reinforcer for toileting because we know that behavior modification works. In childcare, they're telling me that I can't. Well, licensed programs who are on food programs cannot use food as a reward. Also, licensing prohibits to some extent the use of rewards in general. However, if that is a goal written into an IEP or an IFSP, then that kind of trumps what licensing says at that point. So if the sticker chart is working really well for your child and it is included as part of the IEP or IFSP, then that can continue to be implemented in the childcare setting. So that's something to think about and maybe add in if that is something that your child is using. It might be appropriate to call an IEP meeting to add specific goals around using reinforcers so that it can be implemented in a care setting. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Sorry, I forgot it initially.
Yeah, me too. So one thing that I will link to, and I can put this in the chat box as well, is our family info form. So this is how you access childcare answers in order to get a list of childcare programs or one-on-one support, or just to be like, hey, I need help, where should I go next? You can also just email me directly or email Stephanie directly. But our family info form is a great tool. Also, if you are in the position of working with families, this can be something that you refer families to as well. And then outside of Down Syndrome Indiana, which is a great resource for you, another great resource to keep in your back pocket is InSource. InSource is full of parenting resources and education. They have a ton of school-based supports. So I really look at InSource as the expert on public school special ed. They are your go-to shop for that kind of information. So between myself, Stephanie, InSource, and then our other tools within the advocacy world and special ed, we can definitely connect you to who you need to be connected to. In addition to the Toileting Children with Special Needs guide on our website, we also have a special needs guide that walks you through what is early intervention, what is an IEP, what laws is my child covered under those special ed laws, like the ADA, IDEA, all of those types of things. And then it also has a resource guide of who those special ed connections are, like Down Syndrome Indiana, like InSource, like About Special Kids and Family Voices. So I encourage you to just go to our website, childcareanswers.com. You can access this guide directly, or you can just go to our parenting tips page and it's all there as well. So follow Down Syndrome Indiana on social media, follow Child Care Answers on social media, go to our websites because we have a ton of information there and readily available for you as parents.
Thank you so much. I know this is really, really helpful for so many of our parents to get some of those answers. Childcare is such an overwhelming thing, and we are grateful to have your expertise. I send people your way often, pass along your name and info. So we really are glad to have you on our team.
Thank you. I am definitely very thankful to have you in my toolkit as well.
Yes.
So it was enlightening talking to you coming into this. And I know that I don't have to know everything about Down syndrome because you do. And so I can just refer families to you.
Not everything, but I've definitely learned a lot about childcare options listening to you.
But I just want to thank you all for joining us tonight and reviewing this as a webinar in the future if you're watching this as a recording. And just remember, we're here and available if you need us. So thank you guys.